Lucario is a character that is unlike any other character that we've seen throughout Smash. Back in the day when you first booted up Brawl and saw Lucario on the character select screen instead of Mewtwo, you might have thought that this was the modern day replacement for Mewtwo. The flashy new Pokemon featured all over the place to advertise the newest Pokemon games at the time, Diamond and Pearl. I mean, he basically has Shadow Ball like Mewtwo, right? And he's got that blue aura around most of his moves, kind of like Mewtwo's purple aura, right? Well, think again. Lucario is kind of like a double-edged sword of a character thanks to the mechanic that makes him so unique, and that's his aura. Back in Brawl, the rage mechanic that we know today didn't really exist yet in Smash. It wasn't until Smash 4 that rage was introduced, which is a mechanic that essentially rewards you for losing. The higher percentage that your character is at, the more knockback that your attacks do to your opponent. And let's just say in Smash 4, this mechanic was just a little broken. And by a little, I mean you could die from almost anything, from any character. You basically just were not safe at any percentage. And even though in casual gameplay, it may not seem like this is really that important, you gotta understand that top players really grinded this game to the point where they really understood how to abuse this mechanic. And Lucario was basically the test dummy for this mechanic back in Brawl. And that's because his aura ability was basically a stronger version of the future rage mechanic, except in Brawl, only his aura attacks were boosted over time instead of all of his attacks. Either way, this mechanic opened up the door to some very early KOs and some crazy comebacks. So why haven't we seen more of Lucario? This is the Pokemon that's been in every iteration of Smash since Brawl, and yet it's kind of just a forgotten character. I'm willing to bet that every single other Pokemon is more played than Lucario, with the exception of maybe Mewtwo, but either way, it's definitely one of the least played Pokemon. The answer to this question is exactly related to what I've spent the first minute of this video talking about, and yes, you guessed it, it's his aura mechanic. Without aura, Lucario might actually be the worst character in the game, and I'd say this is true pretty much across every Smash game he's been in. Lucario without aura is kind of like Olimar without Pikmin. I mean, sure, you can make it work if you have to, but why would you want to? Choosing to play Lucario means that you have to have the mindset going into each match that you will most likely be playing from behind, and if you lose any of your stocks early on, you're going to have a mountain to climb in order to win the game. There's already so many added nerves and pressure going into tournaments, and Lucario just adds way more pressure on top of that. I mean, sure, you have the reward of being able to steal stocks as early as like 20%, but you also run the risk of not being able to do anything for the majority of the game and needing to rely on living as long as possible before dropping any stocks. For the casual Smash player, Lucario wouldn't really be a fun character to play because you would feel like you can't do anything for pretty much the whole game. And yes, by casual, I'm talking about the people that pick Kirby, they use items, they can't recover. Nothing wrong with that, but that's kind of what I'm talking about. If you see a complete casual pick Lucario, you already know the first thing they're going to do is use up B and then SD on accident. And on the competitive side, there's really no reason to pick Lucario unless you want to make your life way harder than it needs to be. The only reason to pick this character is if you genuinely enjoy him and his playstyle. Now, all that being said, there was once a Lucario player from Japan that traveled to the US, beat the undisputed best player in the world, and was mere seconds away from winning the entire event. And for us to see that, we have to take a quick rewind back to 2017, the days of Smash 4. Man, I feel really old saying that 2017 was 7 years ago, dude, that's crazy. Frostbite 2017 took place in Ann Arbor, Michigan towards the start of the year, and leading up to the tournament, it quickly became one of the most hyped up events for 2017. With about double the amount of entrants from the previous year, this tournament will go on to feature many of the best North American players and Japanese players, including a 10v10 crew battle between both regions. 2017 was an interesting year for Smash 4 because we really started to see a shift in the game, from different characters becoming more popular in the meta to different players becoming more relevant in the top 8s of tournaments. Sure, Zero was still the undisputed #1 player in the world, but a young newcomer was quickly climbing up the ranks looking to claim that #1 spot. Bayonetta was of course on the rise as well, but wasn't quite at the top just yet. And don't get me wrong, people knew how strong this character was, and there were a lot of top players experimenting with the character, but none of the top 5 players in the world at the time played her. And even though pretty much any Bayonetta player could pull off an upset against any top player on any given day, I'd say Cloud was much more of a problem due to a high skill floor and low maintenance required to stay consistent with. Going into Frostbite, there was a bunch of hype surrounding the Japanese players attending because for a lot of them, this would be the first time that they would get the chance to compete in the US. And all of the hype wasn't just for the players themselves, it was also for the characters that each of them piloted. See, the meta was very different in Japan compared to the US, and a lot of Japan's best players used characters that we rarely ever saw in the US at the top level. Some of the players that people were most excited to see compete were T, the best Link player in the world that would later have a breakout performance at Civil War, Somei, who was arguably the best Greninja in the world, Renai, who was easily seen as the best villager in the world, and even Shuta with his dominant Olimar gameplay. Okay, if you've seen my videos before, you know I'm biased towards Olimar, but I promise you people were hyped for this guy back then. Now, even though these were the players that most people were excited to see over the weekend, it doesn't mean that any of them were expected to win the whole event. If any player from Japan were to win this whole entire thing, it surely had to be Ken, Abadango, Komorikiri, or maybe somehow Kameme barring some bracket luck. Those were the proven top players from Japan that had any chance at beating the top North American threats like Zero, Nairo, Leo, Dabuzz, Ally, Salem, Tweak. I mean, this tournament was stacked. Now, all that being said, I think that just about covers all the real big threats going into this tournament. Oh, wait a second. Yeah, I almost forgot that this video was about Lucario. Yeah, there's still one more player we gotta mention. That's right. Su was Japan's best Lucario player, easily the best Lucario player in the world back in Smash 4, and one of the few top player representatives of this character. Seated at a whopping 23rd, Su was expected to make a strong showing in his North American debut, but at the end of the day, his character was so inconsistent, so it was really kind of hard to seat him higher than that. Like I mentioned at the start of this video, Lucario is such a difficult character to play consistently because of his risk and reward factor. And with a game like Smash 4, where each game only gives you 2 stocks, it meant that if you found yourself losing your first stock early on as Lucario, then you might as well pack your bags and figure out what else the venue has to offer for the rest of the day because you were done in bracket. But despite all odds, Su would go on to have one of the most incredible runs that we've ever seen with Lucario, a character that was such an enigma to many top players. Su's run kicked off in pools with a quick 2-0 against the Captain Falcon main Colm, followed up with another 2-0 against Saren's Peach in Game 1. It wasn't until round 3 pools when things started to heat up against Zane, a Meta Knight player. Su came out swinging Game 1 and took a huge lead, but Zane almost made the comeback right before Su managed to clutch it out. In Game 2, Su took the first stock, but Zane bounced right back and took out Su before he could let that aura build up, which ultimately led to Zane taking the game. It all came down to Game 3, and once again, Zane found himself down but not out. He managed to rack up some damage quickly and started to get a few combo strings that might have led to the KO, but Su managed to survive the game to advance to winners finals of his pool against some random guy named Tweak. Okay, jokes aside, Tweak was seeded 10th at Frostbite and was projected to win against Su by most people despite not having the matchup experience. Su would go on to win 2-0 despite both games being really close, and a big shout out goes towards Lucario's back air killing across stage at 88%. Yeah, that's Lucario for you. Going into top 48, a lot of upsets had already been made across the bracket. Most notably, Ally lost to a Kirby player, forcing him to play against T, who was also upset earlier in the bracket, and this was for a spot to make it out of pools. On top of that, 2 of Japan's best in Abadango and Renai also found themselves in the losers bracket, opening the doors for some other players. Top 48 kicked off with Su playing against the number 7 seed Void, who was widely seen as the best Sheik player in the US and arguably the world. And this is kind of a tricky matchup for Sheik because Sheik was notorious for being able to rack up damage but struggling to kill, while Lucario is a character that thrives the longer he's able to hold on to his stocks. And if you want any indication on how this set went, we just need to take a look at Game 1. Each game in the set went down to the wire until Game 5, where Su managed to live past 170 to pull off the 2 stock against Void to win the set. Void may have played well, but ultimately it came down to those last hit scenarios for each of Su's stocks. Moving on to top 16, Su would have to face up against Kameme, who just came off the fresh upset against MKLeo. Back in Smash 4, Kameme was widely known for his Mega Man, but he also had a very decent Sheik. And for this set, Kameme opted for the Sheik against Su, which meant back-to-back sets against Sheik for Su. Unlike the set against Void, Su quickly found himself down 2-0 instead of being up 2-0. For the first time all tournaments, Su found himself down in a set and used this opportunity to bring out the secondary to try and ignite a spark. After winning Game 3, Su switched back to Lucario in fear of getting counterpicked by that Mega Man, and he pulled off an insane comeback in Game 4 before clutching out Game 5 to win the set and earn a spot in top 8.
It doesn't matter! And Su takes it over Kameme! Wow.
As expected, the top 8 was filled with just about all of North America's best players, but out of all the Japanese players, Su was the only one remaining on the winner's side of the bracket. The only other Japanese player left in the bracket was Shuton, but he was in the loser's side. He would actually go on to beat Ally, but then he ended up losing to Nairo in a close Game 5 set, which meant that Japan's last hope was Su. To kick off top 8, Su had to go up against the Brawl vet Salem, who quickly rose to be one of the best Bayonetta players in Smash 4. And while each player managed to take a game to start off the set, Su managed to take control of the set in Game 3 when he managed to go up 2-1. Su just had to win one more game to secure a spot in winners finals of this tournament, and let me tell you, having max aura as Lucario would definitely help you do just that. You thought back air killing at 88% was bad? How about 54%? And just like that, against all odds, Su had managed to take one of the most inconsistent characters to a place that we've really never seen Lucario before. No matter what your view was on Lucario's placement on the tier list, Su proved one thing for sure at this point in the tournament. The game is not over until that stock count hits 0. And speaking of 0, no surprise that's exactly who Su would face up against in winners finals. The undisputed best player in the world up to this point. And as if the crowd wasn't already in favor of Su, this was definitely another reason for them to root for him. Unlike Su, Zero's path to winners finals was relatively pretty smooth. The only person he dropped any games to was DeBuzz, and that was a set that went 5 games. But aside from that, nobody had even gotten close to beating Zero. Zero was the clear favorite to win the tournament. Su was clearly the people's champ, and definitely not somebody to sleep on. Zero decided to kick things off with the old reliable main Diddy Kong, and started game 1 aggressively to take the early lead. But as Su had done all tournament, he remained composed and utilized his aura to make a comeback. Now Zero was known for having multiple characters, so it's really no surprise that he decided to switch to the Cloud for game 2 just to change up the game plan a little. But unfortunately for Zero, he was once again faced up against that powerful aura of Lucario. At this point, it seemed like Zero had no answers. He already cycled through his 2 best characters, and really the only other character that you might expect would be Sheik, but it wouldn't really make sense for him to play her in this case. So instead, Zero decided to pull out the one character that might sway the crowd to his side, Captain Falcon. After miraculously taking game 3 with Captain Falcon of all characters, Zero decided to try and ride the momentum going into game 4 since he knew that he needed to pull off 2 more wins. Both players kept it close for the first stock, but unfortunately for Zero, he was never able to close out Su's first stock, and as a result, you can imagine what happened. After a dominating 3-1 victory over Zero in winners finals, it was clear that Su had a legitimate shot of winning Frostbite. And it's not like he had an easy path to get to the spot. He legitimately had to play some of the best players in the world, and he just came off of beating the best player in the world. Zero would go on to quickly defeat Nairo in losers finals, which meant that grand finals would be a rematch between Su and Zero to decide the winner of the entire event. And Su obviously had the advantage of sitting on the winner's side, which meant that Zero would have to win back-to-back best-of-5 sets in order to take first place. The best player in the world against the scrappy underdog with a character that nobody expected to see sitting in grand final. What happened next would go on to be one of the greatest Smash 4 grand final sets of all time. And given the state of the game with DLC characters quickly taking over the meta, this set couldn't have come at a better time. Despite winning the first game of Grand Finals, Su found himself in an awkward position heading into the bracket reset. He just won a dominating set against Zero earlier in Winners Finals, but now each player had managed to win a set 3-1 against each other. I would say that the playing field was even now heading into the bracket reset, but was it really? There's no doubt that Su was one of the most talented players in the world, but you've got to imagine that he also had that advantage of his opponents not really knowing the matchup. Zero, on the other hand, just finished playing 2 entire sets against Su, and even though a lot of the games were close, I'd have to imagine that the momentum was leaning towards Zero, especially because he now only needed to win 3 more games. If nothing else, Zero proved that he at least had an answer to Su's strategy, which meant that it was anybody's game heading into the reset. Su's back was once again to the wall as an underdog, but just like his character Lucario, being down surely didn't mean that he was out yet. After trading games back and forth, making phone calls, and asking Sonic players how to effectively camp, it all came down to this, a Game 5 in one of the most back and forth grand finals you'll ever see for Smash 4. Once again, the game started out close with both players racking up around 100% on each other. Zero would manage to take the first stock with a punishing F smash on that laggy recovery of Lucario, but Su quickly bounced back to even up the stock count at 1 apiece. Zero started to rack up as much damage as he could, but we all know what that means for Lucario.
He might be looking for that up smash. He's hanging out on the platforms a little too much.
Until not getting the KO he wanted.
Ooh. Back air, but he misses the part of the back air.
Okay,
come out.
Forward two could potentially KO soon.
Oh, that's laggy. That's laggy.
That is Zero. Who is the best Guitar?
Who is the best?
Who is the best? You tell me.
Zero.
That's right.
Don't question.
It's hard to put into words how impressive Su's run was and the impact that it had on Smash 4 at the time. The raw emotions from the players, the crowd, and just all the reactions online. And the crazy part is that Su wasn't even the first Japanese player to bring a highly underrated character to America and pop off with them. I would definitely have to give that award to Renai for his run at Genesis 3 about a year prior. And by the way, go ahead and check out my editor Jazara's video about that crazy run if you want to know more about it, because he gives a pretty good recap. If you were a fan of Smash 4 back then you definitely remember how crazy of a tournament Frostbite 2017 was. And I really hope this video gave you a little flashback at one of the craziest tournament runs we've ever seen. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe, because I've got other videos kind of similar to this one, and I'm also super lazy with uploading consistently, so you subscribing will help me not be lazy. Lastly, I want to give a big shout out to Jazara for taking the time to edit this video. This is the first time I've had somebody else edit one of my videos, and he's one of the best to ever do it, so I'm really glad we can make this happen. But yeah, and if you haven't watched the full grand final set of Frostbite 2017, I highly recommend you do so. I'll have it linked in the description below. Just go check it out. Hope you all have a fantastic day. Thank you again for watching the video and subscribing, and I will catch you all in the next one.